is a crime.
In my country, it is illegal for a woman's voice to be heard in the street.
In my country, my creative freedom can cost me my blood.
I have a refugee protection, but I'm invisible.
I have a refugee protection, but freedom is not free. You have to buy it.
I don't even have a country. Try being an activist when you're stateless.
I have refugee status, but without NGOs like Refocus, I wouldn't have any support.
I am a recognized refugee in Europe, but I'm still being stopped at airports for holding a refugee travel document.
In Refocus, I can be myself, an artist, in a safe place.
In Refocus, I can be brave in my art and reconnect with activism.
In Refocus, I can create media and teach others.
I stayed here because of Refocus. I bet on Refocus because there is no creative borders here.
Our community wants to say thank you to everyone who has been so generous with their support. But we still need your help to ensure our community continues. You can help change someone's life just like ours by donating today.
Welcome to yet another episode of Fractured with yet another important topic. Today we will discuss the situation of housing for refugees and asylum seekers in Greece. And we have those fantastic guests to shed some light on this topic. We have Megan Attard, who's a program manager at Mazi Housing, and Orsalia Papadimitriou, who's a social worker there. Welcome and thank you very much for coming, for giving us your time, as this is a topic that is extremely pressing here in Greece. So let's get right into it. Could you guys tell us, how does it look like for an average asylum seeker and refugee? What are their housing options in Greece?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, thank you for having us here. Right now, there are not many options. They're very limited. The current policy, the state policy, is camps. So asylum seekers are living there, which is not really a housing option. And by the time they have their documents, so they're recognized refugees, they also have to live even this.
Mm-hmm.
There are programs from NGOs that are very limited. There used to be the STIA program that closed in 2022 that was accommodating vulnerable groups of refugees. And yeah, I would say they're not a lot. They're the squats that they work in solidarity, and they're also housing people. And then, of course, the people who are able to rent their own houses, they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There's also more limited options, I would say, for people that are that have mental health issues. There's actually, I think there's just one institution that provides housing for them, and yeah.
I think it's maybe worth saying that the options for housing inside camps are pretty poor, right? Here in mainland Greece, it's predominantly type of ISO box scenario. On the islands, it changed recently to more of ISO boxes, but there are still those wrap holes, tents. So that's very far from optimal housing. We saw some videos recently from Samos, from the areas of unaccompanied minors. Looks absolutely terrifying. We saw some footage from Malakasa, which is a camp just 40 minutes drive from Athens, and it was really, really sad to see. We were there a few years ago, invited for dinner, and it was pretty okay-ish, but since that time I think nobody renovated it, nobody really cleaned it. Mold was everywhere in this container that they showed us a picture of. So
yeah, I would say in general that not only is the problem with the conditions of the camp, but also the locations of the camps. All of the camps are in remote locations outside of the city centres. This cuts people off from accessing employment, schools, social networks, all of these things that just don't make it a suitable accommodation option. We don't consider the camps as a housing option. It's not housing. Essentially on the islands they are like prisons, also on the mainlands now. But yeah, the conditions are like not livable, and also, as I said, completely cut off from any form of inclusion in society or any opportunities, essentially.
The squats were better because they were inside the city and people lived together with dignity. You have your houses, and then they were attacked, most of them, and they were blocked, and the police were there. And a friend of mine who was there, and he told me he was sleeping, his mom in the other room, and they just banged the door and came out with guns and stuff. Get out, get out. So, and they took them all in one place, and then they start shutting one after another. And I think there's one, I think Notara is still operating. I don't know how. It's a miracle they're still operating. Yeah, every time I see them, they're doing fundraising and stuff. I want to ask, how does the asylum process affect you getting a house? I remember 2016 when I applied, there was not a lot of people actually applying, so you just apply and then you go. You're on your own. So, and then there was the camp in Ilionas. People would go there, otherwise you're on your own. So how is it going on now when you apply for asylum?
So now when you apply, you actually have, if you are 18 plus, let's say, you have the right to go to camps. That, as we said, is not really a housing option. And that's it as a policy. There's not something else. They're starting the program, the Helios Junior now, that is for recognized refugees, but from 18 to 21 years old. But truth is, it has, like the asylum procedure, the way it is, it's really an obstacle and a challenge for people to find housing because, for example, if you're not recognized, you can stay in the camp. If you are, you can't stay in the camp. Then if you're recognized, you can rent a house. But then, for example, you face other problems like racism or something. If your process takes too long and you're, for example, in the subsequent claim, which means that you're not really legalized, let's say, then still you can't rent a house, for example. So you need to be somewhere hosted, how do we say, like in an organization or something.
Yeah.
So I think in general there's not a policy, that sees housing as the right of the people. It's more of is seen as a generosity of the state when they do something, of organization. It's something like this.
And I think the biggest difference was the shift from Estia closing at the end of 2021 and then the move to like camp-based policies. And so at the time, asylum seekers were accommodated in urban housing with Estia, albeit there were several barriers that meant only like vulnerable groups were housed. But now that doesn't exist anymore, and there is no urban housing for asylum seekers. So the only option is the camp. And so this means that people, like many people, end up on the street because they don't want to stay in the camp, completely understandably. And so this, I guess, is the biggest change. Now, as an asylum seeker, your only option is the camp.
Do we know, because this question always really fucks with me, do we know why when a refugee gets his paper, it's the big day, and then you go and they tell you, congratulations, you need to leave the house, and there's no more money. So is there any reason behind this? Why do they do this?
No money. The reason is no
Are we allowed to say that?
Because I wish if at least they come out and say, hey, for these reasons, but
I think it's just a complete, like, I guess, like, to admit all responsibility. Like, okay, we've granted you, like, international protection now. I mean, I don't know the exact reason why. I'm sure somebody somewhere has come up with a reason, but
I was in France and in Iceland, so I follow the procedure there. And when you before that, you don't get a lot of stuff. So they give you a little bit of money, your housing. But when you get your papers, they take care of you because they say, okay, we gave you the papers, now we're responsible for you. Here, it's the complete opposite.
Well, the same situation is more or less in Germany. I mean, we're just going to see how it's going to change with this new political climate. But there's like everybody's getting some kind of an accommodation right after receiving asylum, or they're getting German classes, children go to school, and the accommodation is provided. Better or worse, but there is something. Nobody is being kicked out on the street, and like, nobody knows what is going on with them. Right, so there are some models that function. It costs money, right?
Yeah, and there needs to be the like willingness from the state, essentially, which I think is lacking in Greece. And yeah, this is like something we see a lot, is especially with unaccompanied minors when they turn 18 on their 18th birthday. Yeah, happy birthday.
Your gift is the street.
And of course, like especially like for those who have already received their refugee status, their only option like is outside. And for those who are offered a place in the camp, they have their schools in the city, they have their friends in the city, they have employment opportunities in the city. They're not going to go to a camp 30 kilometers away. So yeah, this is something that also like the Helios youth program should plug this gap, but it's been planned to start for months now and we're still waiting to hear news on it. So yeah, it's a big problem.
Guys, I want to ask you about the legal situation right after people get asylum. So are there like any legal or maybe bureaucratic obstacles once you get asylum that stops you from getting an accommodation on your own, stuff like having a contract for work, some residency permits and stuff like this? By the way, right now it is basically 7 days, right? From the moment you receive asylum and your documents to the moment you have to move out from the camp. It used to be 1 month. I think now it's 7 days only.
Yes, but I think it's not always working exactly. Like, I don't think there's, like, maybe there's a specific protocol, but I don't think it works like this. Usually it's more, I don't know how the decisions are taken at this point when someone is getting kicked out or not. But in general, I think that like after you get your documents, you don't have camp, but you have the chance, for example, if we can say a chance, but it's a privilege actually, to be able to rent a house in Athens, for example. But still, for example, a bureaucratic obstacle is that you can't really apply for the rent benefit, the state rent benefit. I would say it is a discrimination because this requires like 5 years legal and permanent residence in Greece, which is proof from tax declarations, and it's not something that everyone has because the access is not easy. So something that we could say it's a supportive measure for housing, like you rent a new house and you have an amount of money that can support it. It's something that is not accessible at the moment. Like typically you have the right to access it, but you can't.
Because, you know, it seems to me like it's all very connected. So one of our employees needed a bank account, right? To have a bank account, you need an address, right? But how can you actually have a contract for work? Which for me is like, why do you need a contract for work to open a bank account? You don't. You may have other sources of income or not, but like for the future, you need this bank account to function somehow in a society. So I was really shocked when they told me that it's several months of waiting, even if you have those documents, to open a bank account.
And that's
experience.
And that's the thing. It's like sometimes employers will say to get the job you need a bank account, but to open the bank account you need a house. To have like everything is connected, and at the end of the day, without like a permanent address, now also with the healthcare situation, to take an AMCA you need to have a permanent address or proof of address. All of the things are connected to having a house, and there are no housing options for people.
Sometimes it feels it's not one government, it's like different governments, and they don't speak to each other, and you are just lost there. And add on that, you're a refugee, you don't know the language, you don't know how to go through this bureaucracy. It's all bad.
When we were still working on Lesbos, there were people who were always asking, hey, who can just put somebody on their contract for house and certify that this person lives with them so that they can, you know, get all the documents, residency and some and the bank account and other things. It was like ridiculous. Like somebody had like extra 10 people, you know, living with them on paper. But this was the way to like somehow maneuver this situation. just absolute nightmare.
Yeah, and in general, like with all the sort of social like bureaucratic offices, like going there, like maybe not knowing the language, not knowing your rights, like not having someone to accompany you, like it's so difficult. Like, and you go and you are missing one paper, and then they send you away, and it takes 2 months to get another appointment. So like everything is just very, very complicated.
One of our students was moved from Lesbos to Athens, and as a whole vulnerable family, a mother with 5 kids, they were given housing by, it was still UNHCR who was managing the STIA program, so they were given a house, and when they arrived, the neighbors blocked the entrance to the, it was like a block of flats. UNHCR had to come, intervene, they called police and the whole thing. And I was really thinking what a big role race and our, prejudice play in this situation of finding housing, right? In the end, they managed to enter this building, but they didn't feel welcomed, right? They didn't do anything yet. They didn't even move in, but they did not feel welcome.
Yeah. And this is definitely something we see, because the aim of our support is eventually residents will move into their own independent accommodation, and so trying to find independent accommodation when they're ready to leave the program is very, very difficult because of reasons like that. And also, if for Mazi to find new apartments to host people is also another obstacle, because firstly, they don't want to rent to NGOs, and then they don't want to rent to NGOs housing migrants, and they don't want to rent to NGOs housing male migrants. So it's just layers and layers of discrimination, essentially.
2 of our employees, they were looking for new housing, and they found it extremely difficult even to go through a phone call to just see the apartment. So they saw all the announcements and so on. And at some point, one person asked me to make a call because they already recognize me by my accent. They will hear your accent. It's different. So at least we will go and get this apartment. And the requirements were so strict. I really do not believe that the requirements are so strict for Greeks as well, or internationals. Not even like Greeks, this is a different situation, right? But internationals, not only they had to show their contract till the end of the year, I had to provide papers saying that we intend to hire them for the next year, that they perform well, that they behave, that whatever, we take some responsibility in case something happens, was beyond ridiculous.
Yeah, I also, we're discussing an example of a person who rented his own house, and he was asked to inform the landlord whenever he changed jobs, which is nothing. It's not a law, it's not a rule, it's nothing. Or they call and they ask directly, where are you from? And the person feels obligated to respond.
Of course.
Whereas, it's
and
totally
also we've had situations where somebody has tried to rent an apartment with the travel document, and they've said no, you need to have an actual passport, and it's like
what?
The passport is
Traveling
also
inside.
it's something that they ask for everything, whereas you don't need the passport. You need the passport because no one knows, and they think that this is the identification, and that's the passport for registering to the gym or something. I don't know, but
It happened to me in the bank. I have an account there, and I gave him my ID, and he said, "Where is the passport?" And I said, "This ID is from Greece. Why do you need the passport?" And he just blocked me, and I was just sitting there waiting, and then he had to call the central bank, and I hear someone yelling at him, "Give him his money." So
Nice.
so and he was like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." I was explaining to you, this is Greek document, as if because they know if someone is coming from Spain, you need their passport, but it's the paper from here. I don't know. But also we are not seeing racism and stuff just from society, also from top. And we see now a lot of right-wing parties taking over many countries and changing policies against refugees. How does this, and we come back to Greece, because the new government, I think 2019, the change of government, how these policies now affecting the quality and the quantity, the housing that refugees are getting?
Yeah, I think it's clear, the direction, if I can say like this, direction of the government is clear, and what their plans are and the policies are for the refugee population. And also, I remember when Germany put stricter control on their borders last month, the Prime Minister said that it's your fault that you have this kind of welfare system, like saying, because your welfare system is good, better than Greece, you're inviting
You
people.
have a good PR.
They're coming. It shouldn't be like this. People shouldn't like your welfare system. He didn't say this. I'm saying, sorry. I don't want to. So I think it's like they're trying to make an example for people not to come. This is what I understand from the whole policy. And it is indeed is racism from the top, is institutional racism. It's not that they're not saying something, but actually the government right now, it's, let's say, more legalized and more modern, far right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think it's like part of this like out of sight, out of mind approach. Like, put the camps far away. They're not in the city centre. The tourists won't see it when they come, and so it's not happening if you can't see it. This kind of thing.
As you mentioned, STR program, Helios, now this Helios Junior. Not everybody who listen to us know those programs. They're not deep into the Greek housing system. If you can explain a little bit more, how did those programs operate? They operated for EU money, right? So they were just maybe partly sponsored by Greek, from the Greek budget. It was predominantly European Union that sponsored those.
Right now, nothing is working at the moment except camps, but they're planning to implement.
I think we're going to name this title this podcast. Right now, nothing is working.
But I mean, in general, Estia, okay, it had some faults, but it provided housing in the city centre, and an improvement on camps. And since that's closed, as we said, there's nothing other than camps.
But it was only for vulnerable ones, right?
Yes. And towards the end, I think it broadened its requirements, shall we say. But at the time, and this is actually why Mazi formed as an organisation, was because they were seeing many young men coming to a legal centre at the time and saying they didn't have housing because they didn't qualify for SDA. So they were either in the street or given places in camps very far away, and there was no housing options for men. But it was predominantly for women, children, families in the beginning, and then towards the end provided housing also for men. But that obviously closed, and then maybe you can speak about Helios.
Yeah, Helios took the place of SDA, and it was more an integration program, let's say. It was supposed to be. And that's why I think it was very strict with what you have to do while living in the house. So you need to follow specific programs. I think you need to learn Greek. And if you didn't, you were actually excluded. So I think, again, it was it wasn't as supporting the right to housing. It was more that you have to win your house. You have to prove us that you deserve it. Otherwise, you're not getting it. But it was a weird transition, because in ST, actually, people didn't do anything. I mean, they weren't provided with tools or with connections or with networking to society, and suddenly they had to go to a strict program that they had to do everything like students, let's say. So I think none of these were sufficient.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that for Helios program, it worked like this, that you had to find somebody who would rent you the apartment, and then they would sign the contract for them, and so on. One of our students, when she signed up, it was before COVID still, the waiting list was 8 months, more or less, they estimated for it, because it had also limits, right? You could only stay in this housing for, I think, 5 months or something like this, and then 8 months of waiting for it. So the lines were huge, and people don't mind going to Greek classes, integrational classes, and so on, because I think at that point, before COVID, some people still hope that they maybe will make their life living in Greece, that it is still possible. Now, with everything that people went through and the PR, negative PR of Greece that is spreading around all refugees, everybody's more focused on how to leave and apply again, right? Even if you're going to go through the whole thing again, people are willing to risk it, because, being honest, there are basically no opportunities here. It's so sad.
And yeah, I think with a lot of things, the idea in theory, like if it works, is actually very good, but in practice, it doesn't work. And like with Helios, the idea that like they pay like a contribution to the rent, like if that comes on time, that contribution, but it didn't. And so this also created further problems with like the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, that the landlord wasn't receiving their payment. So this also like contributes to like these sort of negative relationships between migrants and the people renting their apartments, and so this caused more problems. But like in general, if that program works and functions well, like it would be a supportive thing, because many people do want to learn the language, many people do want to stay here, but as you said, like when you keep getting barriers after barriers, it's very difficult to build something.
The whole problem is that integrational classes and Greek classes, this is something that should start with the application for asylum, not after people are granted asylum, and not only for small groups because there are no fundings. If people are getting some kind of classes lessons already in camps, they are better prepared for what's out there, right? They are able to apply for certain things, organize their life, basically. But like the only Greek classes that are organized are by some NGOs, and usually it's for kids, and it's a very basic. Not everybody. There are some organizations, especially who are teaching outside and building actually whole structure for it. But it's not for everybody. There are just too few of them.
Yeah. And I also think that it should be the right of the person to choose whether they want to learn something or not. And I think the role of the organizations, the professionals, and the state should be to provide with opportunities and the knowledge and the networking, rather than obligating someone to do something in order to have a right to
housing.
Access.
Yeah, like the housing shouldn't be conditional on learning Greek. Like this should be.
It just seems from the point of view of a refugee that you're like a criminal coming out of jail, and now you have to prove to society that you're safe enough, and so they can host you. And maybe here they do it as if in the United States when they do it with pedophiles, because in order to sit in one street, you have to tell everybody. And they will all be like, there is a pedophile there, don't go and play there.
Yeah, you are legally obliged to tell everybody, like on your street and your employer, that you are a convicted pedophile, especially if you work with kids. So like probably you won't.
And when you get the apartment, you have to be extra nice.
Yeah.
So I cannot be Rashid funny. No, I have to be Kalimera, everybody, not make any noise, never bring people over because, the refugee, they are doing a party. Yeah. Oh my God, it's just too much pressure. Too much pressure for me. Like I see it,
And that this whole idea of like deservedness is something that like like you have to you don't deserve, like you have to prove why you should have a house, and like exactly
it's never enough.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
I'm here for 7 years. I'm still proving. Kalimera. I can never go out of my house angry or no. I'm always a Buddha, Zen and stuff like that. Come on, it's too much. And you're helping a lot of people actually. Can you tell us some of personal stories, without mentioning names, of course, of the struggles, if you have any?
Too many.
I don't know. Personal. I think more or less we see people that were evicted from the minor shelter, and if they were lucky and they're like the social worker there, or I don't know, they're responsible for them, had made the referral early, they had the house directly. But other times they're in the street before they come to the house. And then again, leaving Mazi Housing, going to rent a new house, the things that we discussed more or less, racism, access, everything.
But I think it, like in general, is something, as you said, we see a lot is people being evicted, and then of course we have a limited capacity, so between the time of leaving their minor shelter and us being able to provide them a house, they are sleeping on the street, sleeping in places where there's 30 other guys, they have to pay every night, it's not safe, these kind of situations. And so we always want to be able to provide more housing, because there is such a big need, especially for young men. There aren't any really other options. So I think this is at the moment, the demographic we mostly work with is like 18 to 24 being evicted from minor shelters.
Actually, this is something interesting that you just said, because nobody really knows it outside. I don't think it's a way to handle homelessness outside of Greece. The fact that people rent like a bed for like in an apartment full of people, and it's basically your bed. You pay a certain amount of money, right, for like several days, or like basically for a bed.
Yeah.
And then maybe you move out, maybe not. It's almost like a homeless shelter where you just pay a little bit and you get access to shower, and there's no community there. It's just for the several nights.
Yeah, and this is, I would say, like quite a lot of residents who come to Mazi have been staying in these types of places, shall we say, before, where there's like, up to 30 people sharing one room, and it's just to pay for a place like on the floor, and so it's also not a place that you're able to, like lots of our residents go to school, and that's not a place you can study, prepare for school, get a good night's sleep, like have access to healthy food, all of these things. So
Hi everyone, this is Doug from Refocus. Many of you probably know that for the past 8 years, myself and my wife Sonia have been working here in Greece, supporting refugees and asylum seekers to develop media creation skills and have a chance at pursuing careers in media. And this has been a life passion for us. But the earliest stages of this on the island of Lesbos in 2016 motivated us to do something. We thought, how could we as individuals do something to change the situation, which was young people from lots of different places in the world who did not have access to education, who were not being provided any formal opportunities for skills training. And so we created Refocus as a way to change that narrative and change that reality. And we are now here 8 years later with an international network of labs in Greece, in Poland, and in Germany. But that's not possible without really, really consistent support from individuals just like you. And so in this giving season, we're really hoping that you can find it in your bank accounts and find it in your hearts to support the expansion of our programming. The work that we do and the money that we receive, we do not receive money from governments. We receive the predominant amount of support from individuals just like yourself. And that money goes to cover the costs of our programming, the overhead of our labs, and the employment of our most seasoned media creators, those who went through our program and now are teachers. We're very different than the schools that you have back home, where you have endowments and you have an opportunity for families to support their next generation kids who are going to the same school they went to. We don't have that luxury. And so we have to do it as a community. And we are very thankful for all the support that we've received to date. And we hope that you can continue to support us into the future.
There are so many empty buildings in Greece and in Athens in particular. You just pass by the city and you see. And I think it was Milad from your organization that told me that there are 30,000 empty buildings in Greece. I think I didn't make a mistake. This is a gigantic number, and they just like stay empty. So couldn't this be some kind of a solution to the lack of accommodation for refugees and asylum seekers? What are the obstacles to do something about that?
For sure. I think the obstacles are the actual mentality behind these policies, that these buildings, when they're used for hotels, for Airbnbs, they're not going to be used for social housing, where this would be a very good policy. Like, this would actually really confirm, how can I say, the right to housing. But yeah, I don't think it's a mistake. Like, they didn't think to use these buildings. I think this is the policy. And whenever we see, I think now more and more new buildings like renovating to become something like, to become hotels or something like this.
Yeah, and I think there is also, I think many of the buildings, they are sort of locked in this, they're like really old, would require a lot of money to be renovated, and there's just a lack of willingness to do this. But also we've like done some research, and many buildings are locked in terms of like maybe several people own the building and nobody can afford to buy each other out, so therefore nothing happens to the building. It just sits empty for years, and then it takes like big investors from outside of Greece to come renovate them, and of course it's for profit, not for people, and so they make them into hotels, Airbnbs. I think willingness is probably the biggest barrier, but it's definitely something that we see as an option, that if we can do something with these empty buildings, it could provide housing for people. And it makes no sense that there's so many empty buildings and so many people without homes. Because
this already creates more problems, right? At some point, some pieces start falling from those buildings, and it makes zero sense to keep them like that. On Lesbos, we had this very unfortunate, unpleasant situation during COVID, when all the hotels, everything was shut down. UNHCR actually proposed to the hotel owners that they will rent out rooms in their hotels for refugees during the pandemics. They wouldn't pay market price, but they wouldn't earn anything anyways. It was COVID. They were not allowed to host anybody, right? And they all refused, except for 4 on the whole island. And one guy in the north, in one of the most beautiful touristic areas, he said yes to the proposition, and people literally went to his hotel, threatening that they're going to set the hotel on fire. They were apparently afraid that now this will be again a refugee center, and it's not going to be a COVID situation only, that forever ever they, instead of going towards tourism, they will go into support for refugees. Super sad.
And I think if you take Kos, the island, as an example, it's a very touristic island, and they have a huge housing problem for refugees living there, because in throughout the summer, of course, all the hotels are full and all the apartments are rented out as Airbnbs, so nobody can afford accommodation because the prices are crazy. And then in the winter, as you said, all the hotels are empty and people are sleeping in the street, and there's no willingness this could be
do anything about it.
But it's this, and I'm sure it's the same on many of the islands. There's the hotels sit empty, and they could be used for housing, or at least people can pay, maybe not as you said, market price, but contribute to rent. And it's willingness again to do that. It's very difficult.
Let's go to solutions now.
A bit more positive.
It's okay. We have to.
Let's go to you.
And you are part of the solution. So can you explain to us Mazi approach, and how does the community building play a role in your organization?
So at Mazi, our model is based, as you said, community-based housing. So our apartments are shared, and within the houses, residents come from different backgrounds, speak different languages, from different places. And the idea is that by living together, it creates this community that then we have seen time and time again, residents use sort of the connections they make in the apartments when they move on from the program. So maybe they meet someone in the house and then they decide to rent independently together. And of course, it's much cheaper to rent if you have somebody to live with. Also, for many things, to have this sort of network that's often lost when you are displaced. And so to build these communities with other people, so that you have, people that can support you when you need to go to the hospital, when you, with the language. And we often see residents, go to the hospital together because their friend in the house speaks English, speaks Greek, and can help them, has been through the asylum procedure, can explain the steps to them. This is a big part of what we do, is that we try to, within the houses, build an environment that residents can rely on each other and learn things from each other, that they don't need institutions like Mazi to do, so that when they leave from the program, they have this network already made, basically.
How many places do you have in general available? I mean, I know that right now you have 0 places available, but in general, and also you provide housing for male only, right?
So at the moment we have a capacity of 17 residents at a time. We are actually on the lookout for another apartment, but we're facing many obstacles with that. But so we hope to have, again, a capacity of 24 as soon as we can find an apartment. I've forgotten what your other question was. But of course, it's a small number compared to our waiting list that is incredibly long. But yeah, we hope to be able to have more places as soon as.
But I think this is a solution with smaller organizations, because managing those also relations with the owners to make sure that everything works and they will not feel like the apartment is used in a wrong way and so on, so that they will keep renting this apartment for longer. That's a lot of work also, I can assume. You guys do not put any limit on how long people can stay in your places, right? And this is something that is not very typical among other organizations who provide housing, because usually they come up with this argument that if you really allow people to stay for an unlimited amount of time, people will get dependent. This will not motivate them to look for their own apartment, for other opportunities, because this will be guaranteed. There's no motivation to do anything. What is your take on that?
I think we both have things to say on that. So firstly, we have seen, and through our work and also just in general, that like people are motivated to move on regardless. Like people don't want to be dependent on institutions such as Mazi. And so we provide every resident with a 1-year contract. This is not only to provide like security so that people know they have, okay, we have our housing insured for a year, but also because we have seen that to take the meaningful, like the steps that you need and to I guess gather the tools you need to be able to exit homelessness for good, it takes time. And if you are given 3 months or 6 months, you aren't able to like make choices that maybe you want to make, that you have to make choices out of necessity. And so within 3 months, it's very hard to find like employment that's not exploitative, to find like to save enough money to be able to pay the deposit on an apartment, to, you know, actually have enough money that if you were to lose your job, you won't be evicted from the apartment, to like
to open a bank account.
Exactly. To do all of the things, like, okay, maybe in 6 months you can find the first job and take it, and for some people it works, but we have seen in general that average stay of residents is 8 months, so people don't stay the full year, but like knowing they have a year means that people have time to plan, can think about what they want to do, and like make choices that are right for them. So this is the idea why we don't set a strict time limit, but in general people want to move on. People don't want to like live in Mazi forever. And so, yeah, we like really our I guess our approach is to maximize people's ability to have choice and to also feel safe and secure in their housing, and to not have this sort of like, well, you've only got 3 months now, so start like making decisions quickly, because and then people end up probably back being homeless.
No, totally. And I think the most important is that this 1-year contract came in collaboration with the residents. They were the ones who suggested that they wanted something more structured. But I also think that the less time and stricter time that some organizations, or ST also, for example, used to have, it's not justified. It's not based on research that, yes, these are the months that the person needs to be totally independent or something. And also this dependency that we hear a lot, and it's everywhere in welfare and all this, it's like, I would say, a neoliberal argument that turns all the responsibility to the person. And it's actually what Megan said, that the people are motivated, they are doing things, they want to do things, but they're going out and they find nothing. So the integration can be one way, like it can be only that the person is trying. And it has happened. I think we've seen people that they're going to school, they speak Greek, they're doing everything, they're working, and they have a negative decision in the asylum. Or again, they face racism, or again, they have an exploitative job. So those are things that are not in control of the person. And I think this system of 6 months, this month, you will do this, like very specific and very strict. It's more to say that, okay, you had your chance. What will you do with this? Where there's nothing, like no one else takes responsibility. And I think it's a way to transfer the responsibility from the welfare state, let's say, to the person.
And I think why our approach is the housing and the social support is because whilst residents are living in the house, they are like working together with Orsalia to, find employment, to access the asylum procedure, to do all the things that they need, so that when they are ready and they feel they're ready, they will leave. And it's people don't become dependent because they want to move on. Like, nobody wants to be living in a situation where they can't pay for their own accommodation. And so I think we give a year's contract as like a safety mechanism, but the idea is everybody is working towards leaving, and they know that from when they arrive, that like this is a temporary solution, but I have time to make decisions that are right for me and that will hopefully impact my future in a better way.
How does the contract work? It's like you have one with the refugee and one with the landlord, or you just make them do it?
So the contract is between the organisation and the resident.
Okay.
And it's basically it's a contract between the organisation and the individual, that like these are what we agree to provide in the year, and this is what you agree to whilst living in the house. The same as you would sign with a landlord, but it's just with the organisation. And of course, like the contract can be ended if either side breaches the contract, but we separately have rented the apartment with the landlord, and it's between the organisation and the individual.
You're the middleman.
Yeah.
Yes. Guys, you opened just before the outbreak of COVID-19, right? How was it during COVID for you and the housing? That must have been really challenging.
Yeah, I think the challenge was probably that the biggest challenge I would say was that the asylum procedure was in effect halted, and so nobody could really live out any plans because they were just waiting in limbo, basically waiting for their asylum procedure. And so this meant that all of the residents in the house were sort of stuck. Very hard to find a job, very hard to engage in different services. As we're all aware, and so it just was sort of like a stagnated period of time, but then obviously over time, as the restrictions relaxed, people could find employment, and then so it was basically like a big pause in time, as it was for most people, I guess.
But you managed to get people in your housing before all the restrictions came and stuff like
this.
Oh.
So we launched with a pilot program in 2019, and then in the start of 2020 we launched as we are now. And so we had brought, I guess, residents to the house, and then COVID came, and it was a sort of for everyone, a big crazy situation.
Crazy time. Absolutely.
How do you advocate for policy change? Because this is a solution, but it's not forever. So how do you advocate so the conditions be better in the future?
Yeah, I think we advocate both in the micro level, let's say, by defending residents when they're going to find a new house, for example, or when they are in minor shelters, and we have a discussion. So how can I say, we're defending the right to housing, if it has to do with discussing with the focal points of the previous residency, or with the landlords, let's say, of their next. But also we're writing advocacy posts about the situation in Greece, for the people also to know what is it about. We have also this campaign for communities, not camps. And for this year, we were saying that we would like more stronger relationships with organizations, with advocacy actors, to be able to put more pressure in this, and indeed what you said, for the situation to go a step further.
You said communities, not camp. That's your campaign. I really like it.
Yeah, this is something we are posting everywhere. But community, basically the access to housing in existing communities and not camps is our biggest, I guess, advocacy point. And the benefits of living within the existing urban fabric and all of the benefits this brings, rather than being isolated in a camp.
I think this has something to do with you advocating for social housing, right? Because I was very surprised to learn that something like this doesn't exist in Greece. This was very interesting. I thought it exists everywhere.
No, sorry. Right now, no. It doesn't exist. And this, I think, it's what you said, this is the point of the advocacy. We're trying to emphasize that It's not house for someone who is very vulnerable, or house for a child, house for a pregnant woman. Everyone needs house. It's not like no one needs it more or less. Everyone needs the same, and this is, I think, what we're trying to show. But yeah, right now social housing is not existing. I think there is
Yeah, they've done a trial, like what's the word, pilot project in Thessaloniki, apparently, that was launched social housing, and apparently it's been really successful, and they've secured funding from the state. At the moment we have a volunteer who I think you maybe met a few weeks ago, who is researching social housing in Athens, and so it's something that we're looking into and seeing how this, because it is crazy that it doesn't exist already. But of course, this is something that requires a lot of funding from bigger bodies than where we currently get our funding from. Absolutely. So it's, it's something that I think is a wide-scale problem in Greece, not only for like refugees and asylum seekers, like in general, social housing should be an option for people. Especially
that we're discussing, of course, the situation of refugees and asylum seekers, because this is what we do, this is our mission. But there's a massive homelessness crisis among Greeks as well, right? Just walking from here towards the nice touristic center in Monasteraki, you see so many homeless people. They're not refugees only. They are predominantly, what I see, Greeks. And the big problem is that it's not the homelessness that is like somewhere in between. It's like a homelessness that is already at a very low level, where you see that people really reached, if I may say something like this, some kind of a bottom. And I don't want to be insensitive, but people usually have this, like, people ask you for money, or just like, no, maybe they are not, honest or something. Here in Greece, you really see that people who ask you for money are in a desperate situation. And this is so for me, this problem with housing, it's not only about refugees. And from what I see, there's not much happening for Greeks either.
Yeah, I think this is like the extreme homelessness that we see outside, but I would also say homelessness, it's also like living with 6 people and not be able to pay your electricity, for example. It can take many forms. And I think that, like with the asylum seekers and refugees, it's more or less the same mentality, but more oppressive. Like we don't have camps, for example, for Greek people. But still, the point is not to secure people's life, like for someone to have a good life, let's say. It's to manage the extreme poverty. That's why we have also the homeless shelters. They're not housing, but they're shelters, presented as a housing solution, where it's not. There are also like people sleeping in their cars, sleeping like, I don't know, also what we said about 10 people sleeping together. This should also be considered homelessness.
Yeah, and I think because I've heard before people saying like, oh, but there's not that like many people sleeping on the streets in Athens, and like a lot of the homelessness is like hidden homelessness. And like, okay, in the centre, yes, there is lots. But I think like in other areas, there is lots of homelessness. It's just not as visible, and it's people like living in basements without electricity. Like you said, sharing with 10 other people, like all of these types of homelessness. It's not always as visible as like in close to the centre.
I was trying to actually find some numbers on this, on homelessness and then homelessness among refugees, but there's nothing like this in Greece. And apparently, according to OECD, there's no legal obligation in Greece anymore to collect this data. So it was absolutely impossible to say how big the problem is.
But I think it would be interesting at some point for us to see, and for the people who are not in the field, how much money are spent on surveillance in the camps, on police, on all this, and are not spending in housing, which is the actual need. Because sometimes we get in the trap, me as well, that we say, there's not money for this. There is money there, but they're not giving it this way. They have a policy. It's not the lack of policy. It is a very specific policy. This is what I think.
Let's say the Greek current government wants to learn from other countries, let's say.
They know, don't worry.
But let's say they come and say, we want to learn from successful countries how to handle this issue. What are the lessons that they could, implement and
What are
learn
the
from.
good models?
Yes.
Yeah, there must be something.
Yeah. In general, I would say that in Europe, the policies more or less are the same, oppressive, maybe sometimes less, more modern, more civilized. Maybe you don't live in exact tent, but you will live in a container that you will have water, whereas in Greece you won't have. But I would say there's also examples of countries or cities trying to fight the general homelessness, the general housing crisis, while like reducing Airbnbs, reducing golden visas, or like supporting more organizations maybe to implement other projects.
Yeah, and I think that like across Europe there are some good examples, but it's hard to. I'm hesitant to say a country because within every country there's a lot of problems, and I think that like I'm not like also in doing research like I'm not sure there's one country that's a perfect example to look to, because lots of countries fall short in many areas, and also in different districts it works very well, in others it doesn't. But I think the main lesson would be that like housing needs to be in existing cities and towns and not like isolating people outside of the city. And I think that's the places that implement policies like that on the way to doing the right thing. I'm not sure they're doing the right thing, but like I guess more compassionate and open reception policies rather than this hostile and
It is obvious to me that most people want to go to big cities because the job opportunities are greater there, right? And schools for kids and so on. We had the situation in Poland when Ukrainian refugees crossed when Russia attacked Ukraine. Most of the people just wanted to go to big cities, right? Nobody really wanted to go to smaller places, smaller towns. So we had some even places for them already there, but like people really didn't want to move. It was just Warsaw, Krakow, Katowice, so the big places for them to stay. But I was thinking about also one solution that I heard Spain introduced already some time ago at the beginning of the crisis, so like 2015, 16. And I think I heard about something similar in Italy, but I cannot remember right now the name of the place. So because so many people are, even like Greeks, Italians or Spanish people are moving to bigger cities, and small towns and villages are getting emptier and emptier. Therefore, there's, for example, no reason to keep a school there for the kids because there are not enough children. So now they have to go to the next nearest town or village. They have to combine those cities. So what they did in this Spanish town/village was that they moved some of the refugees there, predominantly families with children, so that they can go to the school in order not to close the school. I don't know if you think that this could be possibly also a solution for Greece.
I'm not really aware, so I don't know if, but what I'm thinking that this has to be done very carefully and very like not creating a situation that we're sending people somewhere to be alone without access to health. For example, this would be a problem in Greece, that in the village there's not really access to hospitals or something, and not to create the culture of they need a specific type of house, a specific place to go. I think, I don't know, maybe it would create problems in inclusion.
Yeah, I think there would need to be like the right support in place to ensure people like feel welcome in those places as well, because I think the like often the benefit of big cities is that like they're much more multicultural. People feel like they're not like the other. Like I know like sometimes on like the islands and stuff, it's like very obvious when there's the Greeks and then the others, and it's like you don't want it to be
the refugee in this village.
And so I think there would need to be like the right support in place to manage that process carefully, I guess. And but it's a interesting approach.
Okay, I think this is all we had time for today. Megan, Orsalia, thank you very much for joining us and discussing this topic. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with an interview, and in between you can listen to our Humanitarian Watch and Disinformation Watch. So stay tuned. Thank you very much to our partners, Aperture, Choose Love, Alliance Foundation and Vir Foundation, and see you soon.